Welcome to the Saturday Cadence podcast. I'm Blake Biscardi, and remember, the Saturday Cadence podcast is the heartbeat of college football. Welcome into the college football playoff quarterfinal special. We're going to have full previews and predictions on all four quarterfinal games. So my name is Blake Biscardi. I am your host alongside David Wertheim and Grant Kincaid. Guys, let's hop right into this. Let's waste no time. We got a big slate of games. New Year's Eve starting with Penn State and Boise State, and then New Year's Day we have Texas, Arizona State, Ohio State, and Oregon, and the nightcap Notre Dame and Georgia. Phenomenal slate. These are going to be great games. We're going to lead the show, Ohio State and Oregon. This Rose Bowl is going to be a spectacle, must-see TV. This was a classic last time in October when we saw this matchup between the Buckeyes and the Ducks. David, what are your thoughts at first when you see this matchup coming in? Oregon, the number one overall seed. This is their reward, quote unquote, getting the Buckeyes, arguably the second most talented team in the country. So how do you think this matchup is going to shake out? What stands out to you heading into this game? Because I think this is going to be a classic in Pasadena.
Well, the game against Tennessee was what Ohio State fans have dreamed of for a while. It was Ryan Day doing what he's done before, and that is opening up the offense after a tough loss. We've seen it a couple times in bowl games recently, and now, after a tough loss against Oregon earlier in the year, there's an opportunity for Ohio State to avenge their probably toughest loss outside of Michigan in several years. When you really think about it, they lost to Oregon in 2021. They lose to Oregon again this year. Two different coaches for Oregon in that time span, and now they finally get a chance to avenge it in postseason play. It's going to be really exciting, and obviously probably the two most talented teams left in this tournament, and what everyone is saying, a de facto national championship game here. So really exciting, both sides of the ball, and should be a great matchup for sure.
Yeah, I do think this game is going to decide the national championship game. I think the winner of it wins it all. There's so much to discuss in this game when you look at how this game played out the last time. What happened? Dillon Gabriel went off for 341 yards, 2 touchdowns. Jordan James ran the ball well for $115 and a touchdown. Then on the other side, kind of got lost in all this game because of what happened at the end there with Will Howard, where he slid with a second to go. Time ended up running out. Ohio State did not have a chance to attempt a field goal. Debatable if they would have even made it to begin with after we saw how Jaden Fielding dealt with a pressure situation against Michigan. But Will Howard has only thrown for 300 yards twice this season. Tennessee most recently, and then against Oregon, he threw for 326 and 2 touchdowns, even though it wouldn't seem, though, that's what he did. So I think Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Egbuka, Carnell Tate, they're all going to be involved in this game. But Grant, when you see this matchup between the two quarterbacks, which defense do you think has the better chance of slowing down the opposition here? Is it the Ohio State defense in that revamped and retooled structure that they've done since the Oregon game, slowing down Dillon Gabriel? Or do you think that the Oregon defense is going to find something here and confuse Will Howard, or maybe play with two deep safeties there to keep everything underneath and make Ohio State drive the length of the field instead of hitting some of the big plays they did against Tennessee?
I think Ohio State's defense has the best chance to answer your first question there, just of affecting the game and taking over and, being the difference in the game, especially because, we saw Ohio State score 30-plus points on the road at Oregon. And, obviously they left points on the board there, but I think the real difference will be, can Ohio State's offense and Will Howard stay within themselves? Like you said, take the shots, but not too many to the point where you're letting Oregon safeties or DBs get too many shots of the ball, and then we're turning the ball over. But I think Ohio State's defense will be the difference, specifically DBs like Denzel Burke, because, it's the elephant in the room that he gave Ohio State, or gave Oregon too many opportunities to score. And in that game, it was hard to overcome by the end.
Yeah, and Grant, too, with this defense with Ohio State, the cause of this change that they had to undergo, Jim Knowles revamped everything on the off week, and then against Nebraska and so forth throughout the rest of the back end of the season, it looks completely different now. And also, Sonny Styles has really come within himself as a linebacker for Ohio State, and I think that's going to be a big difference. The elevated play of Sonny Styles and Cody Simon at linebacker for the Buckeyes. I don't know if Ohio State's going to deal with a spy on Gabriel the whole night, because you're kind of in a pick your poison situation there. If you're going to leave a spy, it takes a man out of coverage, or it frees up a would-be rusher, which could give Dillon Gabriel more time, which is how he kills you. Maybe Ohio State plays with the two high safeties to keep everything in front of them. they're going to have to choose. But one thing Ohio State has to do is get pressure on Dillon Gabriel, because if they give him time to throw, he's so good at extending plays as it is. But when he has a clean pocket like he did last time, he'll just carve you up. And Oregon's receivers are so good. It doesn't matter how good of defensive backs that you have. Ohio State has really solid ones, but we saw Denzel Burke, one of the best in the country. He got almost 200 yards done on his head the last time and 2 touchdowns. So I do expect a bounce back game from Denzel Burke in this one. But Ohio State has to decide if they're going to rush the passer or if they're going to make Oregon drive the length of the field, because what they did the last time, I believe they had 4 or 5 drives where they scored on 5 plays or less, and that was because of the big play. So they've got to do something differently in this game with Dillon Gabriel. David, do you think that they're going to have different blitz packages in this one, or do you think they're going to try to play more into coverage and hope that they can use the defensive line and maybe one linebacker? So maybe they bring 4 or 5 guys to get pressure on Dillon Gabriel. What do you think that game plan will be from Jim Knowles?
I have no idea what Jim Knowles is going to do. I think that's exactly what he wants. They've been a whole different unit since that Oregon game. They've wreaked a lot more pressure with 4, so I could see them, creating some of those stunts and whatnot that they've done over the last couple of weeks to get pressure with 4. Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau were dominant against Tennessee, and I can see them doing that against Oregon. But the bottom line is, I think, yeah, it really comes down to the cornerback play and the safety play in this game. And Caleb Downs has kind of been up in the box a little bit more as almost a third linebacker. We'll see if that continues. They might need him deep a little bit more. It'll be interesting to see if Denzel Burke can rebound. I agree with you in that I think he does. And Davis Enigma-Nosu has been physical all year. And how will the refs be calling it? That's another storyline that we always have to follow. So
Yes.
it'll be interesting across the board for sure. I like Ohio State's defense in this one, though. I think Jim Knowles really has figured it out since the loss last time to Oregon back in October.
I think it's one thing, like Dave said, since the Oregon loss that we've seen from Knowles is that he is hard to predict, even quarter to quarter. Against even Tennessee, we saw very clear adjustments, and Knowles, he's got a unit that is experienced enough and talented enough that he can shuffle around formations and packages, and I really think he is an embarrassment of riches right now. And like Dave said, it's he's kind of sitting in the driver's seat right now with this defense because nobody really knows what they're going to do because they can do pretty much anything they want.
Yeah, and I actually think one of the X factors of this game will be Jordan Hancock. I think he's going to be on the field more than maybe people expect. I know he's been the nickel guy for Ohio State, but he did take a lot of snaps at safety in the game where he was playing back, which allowed Caleb Downs to move closer to the line of scrimmage. Dave, you mentioned it, just as an augmented third linebacker almost, so to speak. And we know how impactful Caleb Downs is on the football field as it is, but when you move him closer to the line of scrimmage, just his football judgment, his IQ, how fast he can get downhill and sniff out those running plays. I mean, he's just a tremendous athlete. So anyway, Ohio State can move him closer to the line of scrimmage, I think they would take that opportunity. So I would look for Jordan Hancock to be the X factor of this defense for the Buckeyes. But one thing I want to point out, if we flip here to talk about the offense, if you look about what Ohio State was able to do last time, they ran for 141 yards in the game. Most of that came in the first half. Ohio State had to, well, they didn't have to, they just chose to because of the injury to Josh Simmons, abandon the running game or didn't use as much as they could. I believe they ran for 1.1 yards per carry in the second half. Ohio State's going to have to find a way to run the football in the game. Now, I think they need to have that approach like they did against Tennessee, where they're stretching the field vertically, they're throwing the football, and they're going to have to be a throw-first team. But there are opportunities to run the football against Oregon. We saw Penn State do it in the Big Ten championship game. Ohio State was able to do it last time in the first half. Boise State ran for over 200 yards. Ashton Jeanty put up almost 200. I believe it was 192 when they played early in the season. So when you look at what Oregon's done against college football playoff teams, they've played 3 this year, Boise State, Ohio State, and Penn State. They have given up over 30 points in each of those 3 games, and they've given up over 200 yards on the ground. So I do think that and Ohio State fans are not going to want to hear this about running the football because everyone has PTSD from Michigan. Ohio State's going to have to find a way to run the football, and I do think there will be opportunities. And they showed a little bit of that against Tennessee. Again, game planning aside, matchups, it was different against Tennessee where it is against Oregon. But Ohio State's offense was fine in that game against Oregon the last time. The game plan Ohio State had was really good. Now, there were times where they did not execute. There was a fumble by Quidshot Junkins. Will Howard botched a snap on third down deep in their own territory on a drive where Ohio State could have scored to go up by 2 scores. Then you had the onside kick happen, the 2-point conversion. Will Howard sliding with a second to go, Jeremiah Smith's offensive pass interference. All these things I'm naming are things that Oregon had to have happened to win the game. So Ohio State lost by 1 despite all of these things happening. So I don't think that there's much Ohio State has to do differently to feel like they can be in this game. This is not that David versus Goliath thing where, oh, can Ohio State beat Oregon? I think these are two very evenly matched teams. That game was played in Eugene, so that home field definitely played a factor in that one. But I think this is a really even game on paper, and I do think that Vegas is right to have Ohio State favored slightly. Not to mean Ohio State can just walk away and win the game automatically, but look at how the game played out the last time and all the things that had to go Oregon's way. Will something like that happen, or can Oregon find ways to create those opportunities again here in this rematch? David, any thoughts on that with the dynamics of that game and how it went and how you expect the Rose Bowl to go on New Year's Day?
Oh, it's hard to beat the same team twice, and yeah, it did take a lot for Oregon to win. There were a couple things that went Ohio State's way. Remember early in the game, there was that interception that could have been on a bobbled ball by Will Kazmarek, the Buckeye tight end. That could have been overturned to an interception. It was not. Buckeyes scored. So there's a lot of things that went both ways there. But yeah, I will say that losing by a point on the road in the manner that they did gives you some optimism that you can beat the team a second time at a neutral site. And I expect Ohio State to win this game at a neutral site if Ryan Day continues to open up the playbook like he did against Tennessee. So I think the Buckeyes have to have some optimism here. And, for Oregon, it's a tough draw. And, again, it's hard to beat the same team twice. They certainly have struggled against ranked teams this year defensively. Their offense will have to carry the load once again, I think, in order to win this game.
Grant, anything stand out to you here as we wind down the preview part of this before we get to the official picks here with this matchup with Oregon's defense against the Ohio State offense and what Chip Kelly will have to do to have success here against Oregon?
No, I do think you're right. In any big game, especially against a team like Oregon, you're going to have to find a way to run the ball, especially early. But I also think you're right that Penn State and us kind of have the blueprint against Oregon. You can really move the ball. It's not about being able to score and get yardage. It's about protecting the ball, because if you put the ball on the ground a couple of times or throw an interception, Oregon can make you pay so quick that you can't breathe by the end of the game. So you're right. You definitely want to run the ball because you don't want it to turn too much into a shootout like that unless you absolutely have to, which I think is what we saw in that Big Ten championship game.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we look at the spread on this game, it's Ohio State favored by 2.5. Now, Oregon was favored before the Ohio State Tennessee game. The Buckeyes' performance in that one swung this line about 4 points. It's held steady at 2.5, which is interesting. Same thing with Ohio State and Tennessee that held steady at 7.5. So Ohio State still 2.5 point favorite here. David, we'll start with you, then Grant, and then I'll round us out on the picks. Do you like the Buckeyes to win and cover here, David? I know you gave us a lean, but how do you see the Rose Bowl playing out?
Yeah, I'll say with a grain of salt, if Ryan Day does what he did against Tennessee, I think Ohio State wins this game. If Ohio State plays anywhere close to they did against Michigan, it's going to be a long night. But for the sake of this, I'm going to say Ohio State wins and covers.
Yeah, I think Ohio State is going to win and cover, especially if it's just sitting at that field goal.
I'm with you guys too. I do think the Buckeyes are going to win the game. We could talk about the revenge factor and everything else. And Will Howard mentioned this in his press conference earlier in the week where he's saying this Oregon loss has been playing on a loop. Jeremiah Smith said he's not really thought about it that much in terms of the revenge. He said, okay, now he knows what he needs to do because of the officials with that offensive pass interference call. So we'll see how all that plays out, the revenge factor and everything. But David, you did say it best at the beginning. It is hard to beat a good team twice in a season. And I do think this is going to be a valiant fight from the Ducks. It'll be a classic game, one of the best Rose Bowls we're going to see. I know it delivered last year with Alabama and Michigan. So give me the Buckeyes to win in this game as well. Let's move into the Sugar Bowl here. Notre Dame and Georgia. This game is a lot more even than you would think when you're just looking at the logos of these two schools, because Notre Dame does not usually seem to hang with SEC teams, especially in the postseason. Now, they've beaten these teams before and they've played around with Clemson and beaten them, but they're an ACC team. But here, Georgia playing with a backup quarterback. Carson Beck is out for the college football playoff. Gunnar Stockton will start under center. David, looking at this, now there's big injuries on Notre Dame side as well, Benjamin Morrison being one of them. Injuries aside here, just looking at this game of who's going to be on the field, do you think that there's an advantage one way or the other in this game? Or do you think it's as even as it's being made out to be? Because typically when you see Notre Dame in this spot, the popular opinion is that they're going to get run out of the building, that they can't hang. And I do think that it's different this year. I think Notre Dame can absolutely win the game. So how do you see just the matchup at face value between the Dogs and the Irish?
I've been saying it all year. Notre Dame, since that loss to Northern Illinois, has done exactly what they've needed to do. They've beaten who they needed to beat, and they've done it in pretty convincing fashion, and they did so last week against Indiana. So I think absolutely this is going to be a good game. And, I won't give away my pick yet. I think it's going to be physical. And obviously, both of these teams having their health issues is certainly very important. But, both of them are still going to come out there and play a great game. And for Notre Dame, this is their opportunity to make that statement on the big stage. SEC's been down this year. Ohio State kind of made a similar statement last week with that smashing of Tennessee. Notre Dame could come out there and give Georgia a good game or win this game. It'll really speak volumes about the SEC state right now and about how impressive of a team Notre Dame is this year.
Yeah, I think looking at this game where you see this quarterback matchup now, Gunnar Stockton going to be under center for Georgia, Riley Leonard for Notre Dame. It's interesting because if you're looking at Riley Leonard, it's difficult to run the football against Georgia in general. Now, teams have had a little bit more success this year than in years prior, but can Riley Leonard win this game with his arm? I think that's the biggest question for Notre Dame because Jeremiah Love is a phenomenal running back. We saw him break the long run against Indiana. But if Riley Leonard cannot win the game with his arm, that's where I think Notre Dame's going to get into trouble. But if they can stay balanced and Riley Leonard can hit those short and intermediate throws, mix in a deep ball here and there just to keep Georgia honest, I think that is their path to victory. They're going to have to run the football, but Riley Leonard, first and foremost, is going to have to be able to put the game on his arm and then rely on it. And on the other side, you see the running quarterback aspect of the game come into play here with Gunnar Stockton. But will Georgia use his legs? Who do they have behind him? Do they have another backup? We saw teams get into trouble with this before. Ohio State had to win a national championship with Cardale Jones, a third string quarterback. And Urban Meyer said on triple option this week, he used to yell at Cardale when he was running in any of those games because they didn't have a backup. It was Jalen Marshall, an H-back. So for Georgia, is that a factor for them? Do they not let Gunnar Stockton use his legs? Or is it because it's a big game, Gunnar Stockton just has to run the football and you have to do anything you can to win the game? And now knowing Kirby Smart and that Georgia program, I think that they will use Gunnar Stockton in any way and always possible to win the football game. But that's an element Notre Dame is going to have to account for with Stockton that they would not have against Carson Beck because Beck would just scramble or he would run here and there, whereas Gunnar Stockton is more apt to running the football. So, Grant, how does this quarterback battle square up to you with Riley Leonard and Gunnar Stockton?
It's definitely an interesting one. It's definitely one that, a ton of mystery on one side. It's going to obviously decide the fate of Georgia's season, how Stockton can play in this game. We saw him briefly in the SEC championship, but we didn't see too much of him to really gauge anything, especially after the injury. And I think, like you said, Riley Leonard and Notre Dame, they've leaned on the run game so much this year. And to their credit, they've been a machine since they lost to NIU at home. Riley Leonard is going to have to make throws, and he's going to have to make throws under duress. It's still Georgia's defensive line. And Notre Dame's going to have to prove, like you said, that, they've taken the step to win a game like this. And I think Vegas is right with, was it sitting at 1.5 right now? So it's really a coin flip to me, especially with Stockton being the starting quarterback for Georgia. And I think it's going to fall on the shoulders of Riley Leonard at the end of the day.
So, David, looking at this matchup too, we see this where we called this a program game on last week's show here with Georgia playing that G. Is that a factor in this game too, just for Notre Dame psychologically playing the top program in the sport right now, even though they're without their starting quarterback? Do you think that's a dynamic that comes into play for the Irish playing Kirby Smart and the Georgia, just that G in the program overall? Or do you think that that's more of a non-factor and this is the faceless opponent, they just have to go win the game?
No, I mean, I said it in my answer to the last question. This game would mean a lot in terms of making a statement. People have doubted Notre Dame a lot this year after that loss to Northern Illinois. I was probably included in that the first few weeks after. Obviously, I've since come around. But I think this is a huge opportunity to make a statement for Notre Dame. And they need to go out there and play their best game. And similar, like I said, to Ohio State and Tennessee, where you have an opportunity to get a big win in the college football playoff against an SEC powerhouse. So they need to go out there and kind of shake that label off of them that they can't compete in these games and go out there and do it. So I guess it's kind of a hybrid, right? You need to do it, go out there and do it because you're playing Georgia, not just go out there and do it and don't worry about that they are Georgia.
Right. And what we talked about last time with this, and it was similar for both Penn State and with Notre Dame. Sure, it was a college football playoff game, and absolutely, both of those head coaches, Marcus Freeman and James Franklin, are now 1-0 in the college football playoff. And was it a big game? Yes. But it didn't have the big game luster that this game will have here, where Notre Dame is playing Georgia, because beating Indiana or SMU in the college football playoff, that's great, but you were expected to win those games. Now in this one where it's 50-50 and you're playing the king of the SEC per se, in this one, this is where it matters for Notre Dame. So I absolutely think that that comes into play. And if Notre Dame can do that, it can now reassert itself on the national stage for the first time in 2 decades, probably. Notre Dame would then become relevant where they can compete with the big dogs in the postseason, not just, hey, we're going to play these big games during the regular season. And you know what? We may beat USC this year. We may beat Clemson. We may go to Georgia and Sanford Stadium. We may play all these big games, Michigan, Penn State, whoever. We're winning this game in the postseason. Notre Dame has not won a New Year's Six bowl game at all in this playoff era until they just went and won a playoff game against Indiana. So now can they build on that momentum here and take down Georgia? That is that next step that this program has been needing to do. Brian Kelly could not get it done. Now it's Marcus Freeman's turn. He's now 1-0. I think this is a massive spot for the Irish. Grant, for you, what do you think the locker room is like for Kirby Smart and Georgia right now? Do you think that there's a way he's convincing his team that they're an underdog or that they're doubted? Do you think it's we have to go defend this G? What do you think that locker room is like with Kirby Smart? Because we know he is a master motivator. And how do you see this in that locker room right now?
Yeah, I mean, he is, like you said, a big time master motivator. He's since Urban Meyer, he's the best I've ever seen, especially for, big games. And I think he's telling his guys, hey, I know Beck is out. And, I think maybe the elephant in the room is that Beck wasn't playing all that well anyways. And he's been banged up for a while, it seems. But, it's a coin flip. Vegas has it as a coin flip. And I know he's going to say, hey, we're this close, and we get a playoff game, and we can't beat Notre Dame. They think that we're already this team that's going to roll over and not even going to make it to the national championship game or to the Final Four, whatever it be. There's just a lot. There's a lot riding in this game, and I think Kirby's going to use that to his advantage.
Yeah, I'm with you in that game too. I do think that that's going to be a massive thing for Georgia. Kirby's going to have these boys ready to go. So we see the spread sitting at 1.5 right now in favor of Georgia. It opened 1.5 in favor of Notre Dame, so it has flipped. David, you and then Grant, then me. 1.5 here is the spread in favor of the Bulldogs. Who gets it done in the Sugar Bowl?
Just a few more times until we get there. Right now, I'm going to take Georgia. I think ultimately their experience in these games is enough, and Kirby Smart finds a way to grind out a win. I can see Notre Dame doing some crazy things and winning this one. Right now, I've got the dogs. Ask me again in a few days.
Yeah, right now I have Georgia, and it is a very, very slight edge at the moment. And to be honest, I'm playing the G. I'm seeing the G on the field against Notre Dame in a huge playoff game, and I'm going to lean there.
Yeah, when I originally made the bracket, I'm a big Marcus Freeman fan. I had Notre Dame, and I know I mentioned this last week. I switched my pick from Notre Dame to Georgia. I'm going to hold with that. I'm not going to bet against Kirby Smart in this spot right here, and I will still take Georgia to get to the national championship game. So give me the dogs to win a close, hard-fought game, a classic Sugar Bowl in New Orleans. Let's move now to Penn State, Boise State. Okay, this matchup is one of those things where we said Penn State had one of the easiest roads to a semifinal and potentially national championship in probably playoff history. I mean, the draw they had here against SMU and Boise. But I think Boise can pose some problems. And David, you talked about this off air with Ashton Genty. So how do you think that matchup plays for Penn State and for Boise State? Do you think there are opportunities where Boise could run all over Penn State with Genty? Maybe they use them in the passing game. What are those things that Boise is going to have to exploit in order to be competitive in this game and maybe even pull the upset?
Well, they're going to have to be creative. And, we've kind of seen this in Boise State's previous major bowl history, kind of pulling out some creative plays down the stretch of games in order to win the games. But I think they're going to have to be pretty creative throughout in their running game, getting lanes for Ashton Genty that he's able to then exploit. And then on the outside, just winning some of those one-on-ones against those Penn State DBs. I think they're going to have to, stack the box pretty heavily to contain Genty, or at least give the illusion of that. And then outside, you'll have some favorable matchups if you can win them. So this game could really be in the hands of those Boise State skill players, not named Ashton Genty, the wide receivers, their ability to get open, and then Ashton Genty coming in as the hammer down the stretch of drives and down the stretch of the game.
Grant, what do you see in this matchup between Penn State and Boise State that stands out to you? Do you think this is one where Penn State's defense can just smother that Boise State offense and they may not have to do as much on the offensive side of the ball, similar to SMU? What do you see in this matchup?
Yeah, I think like you said, Penn State's kind of their program's kind of engineered to stop the run, and as good as Genty has been this year, and I know that teams have been geared to stop him all year, and he still put up these insane numbers and gone to New York. But Penn State, especially this year, has the front seven to really stifle the run, and I think throughout the course of the game, that's going to wear down, and Boise State's going to have to open up their playbook and throw the ball, and they're not going to be able to lean on Genty, and Penn State's going to win.
Let's go ahead and hop into the quick picks for this one. As we're winding down the show here, Penn State opened at -11. It's now -11.5. Double-digit spread in this game, which is insane to think for a quarterfinal here, just the way the bracket is set up. David, you first, Grant, then me again. How do you see this matchup playing out here? Boise State 11.5-point underdogs.
Well, Vegas usually knows. I'm going to take Boise to cover, and ultimately Penn State wins a close one.
I think Penn State covers.
Yeah, I look at this game and I thought Penn State would roll. I think that there's a way this sitting at 11.5 that if Genty starts running wild in the first half, Boise State can keep it close. So I'll take Boise State to cover. Not super confident in that pick because I do think that Penn State's going to control the game, but I will take Boise State to cover, but Penn State to win and get to a semifinal. So final game here that we're going to talk about is the Peach Bowl between Texas and Arizona State. Cam Scatterboo, big talking point in this game, a talented running back for Arizona State. Texas on the other side ran for almost 300 yards against Clemson. They've got Quinn Ewers under center and Arch Manning right behind them. Talent everywhere for Texas. David, what stands out to you in this matchup between the Longhorns and the Sun Devils? Because there's a lot more belief out there than what I think for Arizona State to actually pull the upset in this matchup.
Yeah, I was high on Arizona State at the beginning, and Texas really convinced me of some things last week. They were pretty dominant there against Clemson when I didn't think they would be. Honestly, I thought Clemson had a good shot to pull that one out. Texas was pretty dominant, and I think they're going to be dominant again in this game. And ultimately, Arizona State just a little bit worse at the skill positions and a little bit less athletic than Texas, and it catches up to them in this game.
Yeah, I think Texas is just going to overwhelm Arizona State talent-wise. Like you said, Scatterbo's a great running back, but again, it's another team that is going to rely on the run a lot and rely on their defense being able to slow down a Texas offense that I think is going to be too much.
Texas is loaded on both lines of scrimmage, especially on the defensive front. It's going to be really hard for Arizona State to run the football. Now, Sam Levitt's a talented quarterback, and if he's able to hit some big plays down the field and stretch it vertically, that is what I think Arizona State's best shot and hope is in this game for them to do. And I just don't know how they do that because Texas pass defense is among the best in the country. It's a very talented secondary in Autzen. So I'm with you guys. I do think that Texas is going to be overwhelming in this game for Arizona State. We see the spread sitting here at 12.5. It has not moved. I still think that's a good number. So if we can do a quick pick on the game here, David, -12.5 for Texas. Do the Longhorns win and cover, or do you think that Arizona State's able to keep it a little bit within the number?
I think Texas is going to cover.
I think Texas is going to cover as well, as long as it stays under that 2 touchdown mark.
Yeah, Grant, I'm with you. I like it under 2 touchdowns. If it got to 14.5, I'd feel a little bit differently. But I think this is going to map out similar to how Texas Clemson went. David, you mentioned it that Arizona State is slightly less talented and undermanned in certain places, and that it will catch up to them. Again, I think it's going to be that same setup as Texas Clemson. So Texas is going to roll in this one and get to a semifinal and await the winner of the Rose Bowl and what will set up a great Cotton Bowl in Jerry World in the next round. But David, as we did in the last show, we'll do it in this show. What are your closing thoughts here as we approach the quarterfinals of the college football playoff?
We're back again for PTI, I suppose, FaceTime or whatever it was called on Around the Horn. And I was at that Ohio State and Tennessee game, and it was rowdy. And shout out for the Tennessee fans for doing their thing. And they were there early and pretty loud, so good for them. But it was an absolute stomping. And for one night there as a Buckeye fan, you felt like you were back on top. So we'll always have that one, and we'll see what happens this week. I'm really excited for the whole slate, and the 12-team playoff has been pretty entertaining so far. Even with the blowouts, there's a lot to talk about. So here's to another great week.
Yeah, and again with the blowouts, you don't want to blow it out of proportion here with we need to change the format because of the blowouts. We had blowouts in the 14 format too, so I wouldn't lean into that too much. There's just problems with the seating and the auto buys, but that's a story for another day. I'm going to be in Pasadena for the Rose Bowl. Cannot wait for that one. Hopefully, again, David, I share those same sentiments as you from the Tennessee game. Really looking forward to the matchup and being in the Rose Bowl. It's the best setting in sports. But again, we want to thank you guys for listening to today's episode, and make sure you're subscribed to the channel and leave us a review because it really helps out the show. Check us out on social media at Saturday Cadence for more content throughout the week. Check out our website, tsilverbulletin.com, for more written coverage. And remember, the Saturday Cadence podcast is the heartbeat of college football. For David Wertheim and Grant Kincaid, I am Blake Biscardi. We'll see you next time. Enjoy the quarterfinal games. God bless.